My name is Vanessa Carter. I'm 34 years old, founder and CEO of a tech firm you've probably never heard of, because I built it to stay quiet. For years, I let my family believe I was just the sister who rents, the one without kids, without a husband, without real expenses, the one who didn't need much. They were wrong, but I didn't correct them. Not until they tried to invoice me for $150,000, printed my name on a chart like I was a funding source, and called it love. That dinner was never about food. It was about positioning. The china, the candles, the carefully placed chair at the far end of the table. It was a performance. And I was never cast as family. I was cast as leverage. They told me Brandon needed more support. They told me I'd understand because I'm strong. What they didn't realize is, I'm not just strong. I'm strategic. 3 weeks after that dinner, they toasted in the backyard of a new home I never stepped foot in, smiling in a house built on money they assumed was mine. And beneath their feet, the land they needed for water, power, comfort, also mine. Before I tell you how I became the ghost behind their walls, the woman with the deed and the silence to back it up, if you've ever been the strong one, the one they thought they could use without asking, leave a comment. I'm not sharing this to brag. I'm sharing it because maybe you've been Vanessa too. And maybe, like me, you've learned that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's the first move. I hadn't been back to Eugene in nearly a year, and it still smelled the same. Somewhere between overwatered rose bushes and mothballs sealed in closets that should have been cleaned out decades ago. I parked outside my parents' home, engine idling longer than it needed to. The porch light flickered, like it always had. My name wasn't on the mailbox. It never had been. Diane greeted me with that rehearsed smile she wore like a name tag. Friendly, professional, detached. Her arms wrapped around me in a hug that lasted less than 2 seconds, just enough for optics. "You look tired," she said as she stepped back. "Are you sleeping enough?" It wasn't concern. It was performance. Inside, the table was already set. Not just set, staged. Cloth napkins folded into triangles, candles lit. The good china they only brought out on holidays or when hosting outsiders. Except this time, there were no guests. Just us. Me, Brandon, his fiancée, Jessica or Julia or whatever, and our parents. My chair was placed at the edge of the dining room, closer to the patio than to the center of the table, like I was a footnote to the evening. Brandon beamed as he talked about his latest idea, a home gym business or maybe a coffee shop. He hadn't quite decided, but he had found the house. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, walking distance to the park. Perfect for building equity, he said. He looked to me as if I should be impressed. "That's great," I offered. Neutral, polite, practiced. Diane poured me a glass of wine I didn't ask for. Then came the folder. Manila. Too clean. She placed it in front of me like it was dessert. "We've decided," she began with a voice that tried to be soft, "to come together as a family for this next chapter of Brandon's life." "Come together how?" I asked, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. Richard leaned forward. "Support, sweetheart. Financially, emotionally. Your brother's starting something new. It's only fair we all pitch in." I opened the folder. Inside was a chart. Color-coded like a middle school group project. Names, amounts, due dates. And next to mine, in bold, it read, $150,000. Due April 1st. I blinked. It didn't go away. "You want me to give him loan?" Diane interrupted. "It's a loan, honey. With no contract? No repayment plan?" "It's just within the family," Richard added, as if the legality was the part I didn't understand. Jessica or Julia looked at me with a smile I couldn't decode. Sympathy? Superiority? Disinterest? Maybe all three. "You're in such a good place," Diane continued. "No house, no dependents, no real expenses. You said you're still renting, right?" "Yes," I said. by choice. Of course, she replied quickly, but her eyes said otherwise. Brandon shifted in his seat. We already told the seller we had the money. They're expecting the full down payment by next week. My stomach turned. You promised my money without asking me? Richard's face didn't change. We assumed you'd be willing. For family. I looked down at the chart again. My name in print. My money in their mouths. You think I'm hoarding money? I said slowly. Because I didn't buy a house or get married or have kids. No one denied it. You think that makes me available? Like a resource? It's not like that, Diane said, hand reaching for mine. I pulled back. Then what is it like? Brandon sighed. This doesn't have to be dramatic. We're just asking you to contribute. Contribute, I repeated. That's a nice word. The air thickened. Richard cleared his throat. Look, you've always been the responsible one. You work in computers or whatever it is. We just thought you'd want to help. You don't even know what I do, I said. Not in anger, just truth. But you've already decided what I should pay for. Silence. Then Diane tried again. You're strong, Vanessa. Brandon needs this more. That sentence rang louder than any shout. I stared at the paper in front of me. I could feel the decades inside it. Every time I helped with bills during college, every birthday they forgot, every favor they framed as obligation. All of it summarized in 12 bold numbers and my name above them. I looked at Diane. Why wasn't this mentioned earlier? We wanted to present it the right way, she answered. You mean you wanted to trap me? She flinched. That's unfair. No, I said. What's unfair is being told year after year that I don't need much, that being quiet and competent meant I didn't need support, that I owed you because I made something of myself while Brandon coasted. That's not true, Brandon snapped. You think you're better than everyone just because you've got some tech job? Do you even know what I do? He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. I leaned back in my seat, picked up the folder again, ran my fingers over the edge. Years of silence, of letting them tell my story for me, of swallowing pride so no one had to feel uncomfortable. But tonight wasn't about discomfort. It was about clarity. I stared at the paper in front of me. Then I asked calmly, and what do I get in return? A thank you card or a seat at the next table near the garage? They thought I lived in a shoebox studio. They had no idea that Shoebox sat inside the penthouse floor of Arctic's tower. The elevator doors opened without a sound. Frosted glass walls slid apart as I stepped into my office, if anyone still called it that. It was more command center than workspace. 46 floors above the city, with a skyline I'd long since stopped noticing and a silence I'd come to crave. Naomi was already there, seated at the glass conference table, 2 coffee cups steaming between us. She had the look of someone who hadn't slept but didn't care. Black blazer over a ribbed sweater, hair in a clean twist, and her usual titanium-rimmed glasses that made her look more patient than she really was. I'm assuming dinner was a success, she said dryly. I set my purse down. If by success you mean they assigned me a price tag and called it love, then yes. Very. Naomi slid her laptop forward. Want to talk about it? No. Good, because we've got better things. She tapped the spacebar and a dashboard flared to life. Line charts, valuation curves. A headline, Arctic's Holdings closes Series B round at $37.8 million valuation. I sat down and stared at the numbers. Not because I needed to see them, but because they reminded me what silence can build. They think I'm renting a room above a laundromat, I said. Naomi grinned. They also thought JavaScript was a type of coffee. I let the silence settle. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Portland hummed. My life, the real one, was here. Not in Eugene. Not in that dinner table ambush. She pulled out a document. The seller for lot 211A responded. They'll accept if we close in 10 days. Utilities map? I asked. Coming. She passed a second folder across the table. I opened it slowly. Deed transfers. Shell company set up under Vireo Enterprises LLC. Zoning overlays. And finally, the gem. An easement diagram showing the main plumbing line feeding directly through the edge of Lot 211A. This is the route their plumbing runs through, Naomi said, tapping the map. I ran my finger along the blue ink that snaked into the box marked 213, Brandon Carter. So if we own 211A, they'll need permission for access. I leaned back, letting the idea settle. And the seller doesn't know who we are? Nope. Just another holding company with a clean record. We did everything through Edmund, remember? I nodded. Edmund had been with me since year one, the kind of lawyer who knew how to disappear in full view. You sure you don't want me to talk to them? Naomi asked. I looked at her. She raised her hands. I know. Silence has more gravity than screams, but sometimes screams feel good. I half smiled. Screams are noisy. They echo and fade, but silence holds. She exhaled and leaned back in her chair. You're colder than your old dorm fridge, you know that? Which you broke. And which you still remind me of. A flicker of something close to fondness passed between us. A quiet that wasn't empty. Naomi adjusted her glasses and reached for another file. Tell me something, she said, softer now. Do they know anything about what you built? No. Did they ever ask? I looked out the window again at the cranes in the distance, lifting steel beams like toys. When I got my first scholarship, I said, they told me it was good news, because now they didn't have to help. Not once did they ask how I paid for graduate school, or rent, or groceries, not once. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. There had been a time, years ago, when I might have believed the silence was just neglect. Now I knew better. It was design. Back then, I had coded under a pseudonym, sold software patches to startups while working 3 jobs to hide from the pity of family members who called me independent like it was a burden. Naomi and I rented a basement apartment with mildew and no heat. She kept the books. I built the thing no one thought I could. Now I signed off on 7-figure partnerships before my second coffee. I looked down at the blueprint again. 1 parcel of land, 1 pipe, 1 chance. Naomi tapped the folder. Then let's make that our land. And just like that, I stopped being the good daughter. I started becoming the ghost behind their walls. They popped champagne in their new house, posing for photos I was never invited to join. They didn't know I was already there, in the foundation. The drone feed was silent, but I could imagine the sounds. Fake laughter, glasses clinking, someone shouting, "Say cheese!" as the camera snapped photos to commemorate something bought with someone else's sacrifice. Their living room, my former dining room repackaged, looked staged from a catalog. Creamy neutrals, fake fiddle-leaf fig, and a family is everything sign above the mantel that still had the price tag hanging off the back. Outside, neighbors mingled in front of a rented food truck, Brandon holding court like a man who earned what he was handed. I sat in the darkened boardroom of Arctic's tower, the only light coming from the glowing screen. My coffee was untouched. I'd stopped needing caffeine to stay awake years ago. Now it was precision that fueled me. Strategy. Mr. Edmund has just closed. Naomi's message read. Deed recorded. Utilities verified. Lot 211A is ours. I leaned forward, magnifying the screen. In the wide overhead shot, Brandon clinked glasses with a short woman I didn't recognize. His fiancée, I assumed, wore a white sundress like she thought she was starring in a commercial. He looked proud, entitled, unaware. A second drone camera drifted slightly south past the edge of their patio, hovering over a narrow strip of newly paved ground. Lot 211A, now mine. A red digital overlay blinked softly. Utility easement confirmed. Active connection. The plumbing line. Their water, their foundation, their comfort, threaded through what now belonged to me. I had no plans to disrupt anything yet. Not immediately. No chaos. That wasn't my style. Kristen Hale appeared in the frame, lifting a glass of Prosecco as someone handed her a mic. "For those of you who don't know," she said, "I actually went to high school with Brandon. And more importantly," she chuckled, "his sister. Vanessa, I think her name was. Anyone know where she ended up?" The crowd laughed. "She was always serious," Kristen went on. "Kept to herself, never really fit. But clearly this family turned out all right without her." I watched her smile as she drank, eyes scanning the room for validation. Naomi texted again. "Your land. Your rules." I typed one word back. "Initiate." At the city office across town, a clerk quietly processed a notice Mr. Edmond had prepared 2 days earlier. No drama, no headlines. Just a procedural notification regarding pending easement compliance review. Lot 213. Routine, bureaucratic, binding. A third drone, perched on a lamppost down the street, caught the mail carrier placing the envelope gently into Brandon's mailbox. White. Official. Unopened. For now. I muted the drone feed and sat in the stillness. I remembered when Brandon asked me to help him get a job at a software company 3 years ago. I pulled every string I had. He showed up to the interview drunk. They called me after, asked if I recommended him out of pity or punishment. My parents blamed me, of course. "You pressured him. You made him feel small." No one asked how I felt watching him collapse something I'd built. But I remembered. I remember everything. Back on the screen, Brandon raised his glass again, wrapping an arm around his fiancée. They kissed for the camera. His parents stood nearby, faces glowing with pride that wasn't earned, only inherited. Neighbors clapped. Kristen grinned. The water running through those pipes? Mine. The silence holding that house together? Mine. The shadow that would soon stretch across their carefully curated lawn? Also mine. I didn't need to be at that party. The party was already over. They just didn't know it yet. Mom called in a panic. Something about permits? A plumbing issue? I said I'd look into it. I already had. I could hear the chaos behind her voice, the crackle of panic barely masked by a forced composure. It sounded like she was pacing, probably clutching the city notice in one hand, phone pressed to the other ear, waiting for me to swoop in and fix something they never thought I'd be capable of touching. I didn't offer sympathy. Instead, I leaned back in the chair of my office, one floor above Arctics Tower's executive lounge, and watched as Naomi moved across the glass-walled room, calm as always. On the digital board behind her, a chart displayed our current property assets. Lot 211A glowed with a soft green hue. Beneath it, a note: "Cease and desist. Drafted. Not yet issued." "They've called CityWorks twice," Naomi said. Brandon tried to argue with the inspector, then threatened legal action. The clerk told him to hire a lawyer. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I no longer needed to. Down in Eugene, things weren't as quiet. Dad had tried pulling strings, contacting a city councilman he once coached in Little League. But land laws didn't care about baseball games or barbecues. The notice was clear. Unauthorized utility usage crossing private property line. Immediate compliance required. "They think it's just a paperwork mix-up," Naomi added, flipping through her tablet. "They still don't know who owns 211A. "They will," I said. "Today." My phone buzzed again. "Mom, again." I declined. Instead, I rose, adjusted the collar of my blazer, and walked toward the elevator. Naomi didn't ask where I was going. She didn't need to. By the time I reached the Arctics lobby, Diane was already there, standing awkwardly near reception, wrapped in a peacoat she only wore when pretending to be important. She clutched her handbag tightly, eyes scanning the high marble walls like she couldn't decide whether to feel impressed or offended. "I'm here to see the CEO," she told the receptionist loudly. It's urgent. I'm her mother. The receptionist blinked politely. Do you have an appointment? I'm family. I descended the stairs, not from an office tucked in the back, but from the glass mezzanine one level up. Each step of my heels echoed in the cavernous lobby. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. Diane turned as I approached, her expression twisting between hope and confusion. You work here? She asked, voice shrinking. I built this, I said, evenly. She opened her mouth, but I motioned toward the quiet lounge near the side. She followed. Once we sat, I didn't offer coffee. I placed a folder between us, neatly labeled. Inside, property deed for lot 211A, diagrams of the Carter property, city notices, and legal advisories. Atop it all, a cover letter from Mr. Edmund outlining options for compliance. None of them cheap. Her hands hovered over the folder before she finally touched it, as if afraid it might burn. I don't understand, she said. I waited. You bought the land next to Brandon's house? 3 weeks ago. But why? I didn't answer. She flipped through the documents, mouth tightening with each page. We raised you better than this. No, I said gently. You raised me to be silent. There's a difference. She reached the last page, highlighted terms of the easement, the cost of relocation, the timeline for compliance. Her hands began to tremble. You've been watching us? I looked her straight in the eye. No, I said. I've been protecting myself. They raised a toast in a house built on my silence. Now they're learning what quiet sounds like when it answers back. The conference room was neutral by design. White walls, chrome fixtures, a long glass table meant to intimidate with its emptiness. There were no family portraits here, no warm lighting or casserole dishes, just the clinical distance of truth about to be unwrapped. I had chosen this place deliberately. Naomi sat beside me, tablet in hand, her presence quiet and unreadable. She hadn't spoken since we walked in. She didn't need to. She was the only one in the room who knew every move before it happened. Across from us sat Diane, Richard, and Brandon. They had been invited for a utilities dispute resolution. That's what the letter had said. And for once, they had come without smugness. Brandon's jaw was already tight. Diane's eyes were darting. Richard stared at the ceiling like the truth might be hiding in the air vents. A fourth chair pulled back. Kristen Hale stepped in, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. She hadn't seen me yet. When she did, she paused mid-step. Vanessa? Carter? Her voice dropped a half octave. I met her gaze. Ms. Hale, please have a seat. She hesitated, but obeyed. Brandon didn't. He stood, already fuming. How could you do this to your family? You humiliated Mom. You could have just told us about the land instead of whatever this is. He gestured to the documents Naomi had quietly laid before them. Deeds, compliance violations, legal advisories. There was no theater here, just hard data. I didn't rise to his tone. Instead, I tapped my tablet. A screen on the wall flickered on. Video footage began to play. Brandon, weeks earlier, accepting a $10,000 emerging household support grant. He'd smiled as he shook hands with a nonprofit director, unaware the check came from an Arctic subsidiary. Diane blinked. Wait, that was from your daughter, Naomi said simply. Under the Oak Ridge Civic Partnership Fund, fully funded by Arctic's Holdings. Kristen turned sharply. Arctic's? Yes, Naomi said. Vanessa founded it. She's the CEO. Kristen's lips parted, but no words came out. I tapped the tablet again. The screen went black. Then Naomi handed Diane a manila envelope. She opened it slowly, pulling out a printed insurance policy. Your current medical coverage? I said. Plan ID number 903-228. That policy was approved through our corporate benefits arm. You're on it because I added you last November. Diane's face drained of color. Richard leaned forward. This is some kind of sick test, isn't it? No, I replied. This is a disclosure meeting. I reached into my folder and slid a single-page document across the glass. Naomi had printed it on thick stock. No color, just black text, centered. The top line read, Statement of Interdependent Assets, Carter Family. It listed 4 bullet points. Lot, 211A, Owner, Arctix Holdings, Oak Ridge Civic Grant, Origin, Vanessa Carter, Medical Policy, Source, Arctix Employee Benefit, Utilities. Easement under review, I watched their eyes track the list, one by one, like dominoes falling in reverse. All this time, I said, voice steady, you thought I was disposable. A spare part, a savings account, a disappointment. No one answered. I leaned forward, folding my hands together. Turns out, I continued, you've been depending on me. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like something had cracked and begun to settle in dust. Kristen stood abruptly, nearly knocking her chair back. She mumbled something about needing air and left the room without looking back. Brandon sank into his chair, red-faced. Diane stared at the document like it might start bleeding. Richard kept his hands flat on the table, jaw tight. Then, in the quiet, he whispered, Why didn't you tell us? I didn't even look at him. Because you never asked, I said. You just took. I didn't burn bridges. I just built gates, with locks only I had the keys to. The rooftop of Arctix Tower caught the final light of the day like it had been waiting for it. Gold slanted across the sleek glass railing, setting Naomi's hair aglow as she leaned back into the cushioned bench, her tablet resting untouched beside her. Below us, Portland hummed, streetlights flickering to life, windows blinking like quiet Morse code. The city never asked who you were. It only paid attention to what you built. I stood near the edge, a chilled glass of sparkling water in my hand, watching the sun inch down behind the hills. A breeze passed, clean and silent. Behind me, Naomi asked without looking up, London or Singapore first? I turned slightly. London. I want the silence to echo across the Atlantic before I answer anything here. She smiled, tapping a quick note. London it is. Embassy meeting in June. Soft launch by Q4. A soft chime buzzed from my phone. Another message. I didn't move to check it immediately, but when I did, I already knew who it was. From Diane Carter. Subject. Body, I don't know what to say. Maybe you were right. I hope you're, well, no sign-off, no greeting. Not even her name. I read it once. Then again, just to be sure it was as hollow as it seemed. A second chime followed. Another name on the screen I hadn't expected so soon. Kristen Hale. Her subject line, professional apology. Her message was shorter, but far sharper. I judged you by the version others described. That was unprofessional and unfair. I hope our paths cross again. This time with mutual respect. I marked it unread. Naomi glanced over. Anything urgent? I shook my head. Just echoes. There had been others. Brandon had listed the house. Naomi showed me the real estate link with a half-hearted smirk. His fiancée had quietly disappeared from all social media. No engagement photos, no tearful posts. Just gone. The story was collapsing the way weak structures do. No explosion, just a slow caving in. I sat beside Naomi, finally letting my spine settle against the cushion. She said nothing, just passed me the tablet. A single document was open, cursor blinking. Authorization request, remove external parties from discretionary accounts. Without ceremony, I scrolled to the bottom and signed. That was all. Diane's email still hovered in my periphery. I tapped it, then hit delete. No drafts, no response. No second read. Naomi raised her glass, a silent toast. To not needing much? She said. I let the words hang a second. Then, no. I need peace. And distance. Below us, the lights of Arctix glowed steadily. Floors full of engineers, strategists, dreamers who never needed to know what family dinners looked like in the Carter home. They only knew what I built and who I became. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. And that was louder than any revenge. They used to say I didn't need much. No one asked how I paid for school. No one noticed when I skipped meals to stretch tuition. No one cared when I stopped coming home for holidays, except to quietly judge the distance they'd created. They assumed I was managing, so they stopped looking deeper. Being the strong one became a sentence, not a compliment. And by the time they sat me down to tell me my life savings would be better off funding my brother's mortgage, they genuinely thought they were being reasonable. I never screamed. I didn't argue. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. That was the last gift I gave them. Because truthfully, the moment they demanded what wasn't theirs, they also gave me permission to become something they never imagined. A ghost behind their walls. Not to haunt, just to hold the blueprints. The land beneath their foundation? Mine. The health insurance on my mother's chart? Approved by me. The grants they used for home upgrades? Funded through a program I designed. And the CEO they dismissed as a weird tech friend of mine? That was me. Funny how silence, when underestimated, becomes the perfect armor. When I finally sat across from them in that law office, I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply laid out the documents, the facts, the signatures, the trails they never cared to follow. Watching their expressions change wasn't satisfying in the way revenge stories usually are. There was no victory dance, no applause, just clarity and closure. That's the part they never tell you. The most powerful ending isn't loud. It's clean, no screaming, no accusations. Just, here is the truth. Do with it what you will. And then you walk away. I did answer their final questions, not with explanations, but with actions. I deleted the apology email. I removed their access to the accounts. I closed the door, but I didn't lock it with spite. Only with self-respect. In the end, this wasn't a story about vengeance. It was a story about boundaries, about what happens when silence stops meaning surrender and starts becoming strategy. Vanessa Carter didn't win because she shouted louder. She won because she built quietly, loved selectively, and protected fiercely. Herself first. This story reminds us, the most dangerous assumptions are made about the quiet ones, because no one sees the avalanche until the snow moves. Power doesn't always come with a title or a room full of applause. Sometimes it arrives in the form of restraint, of choices made off stage, of dignity held through betrayal. And justice? Justice doesn't need to arrive on time to be right on target. Perhaps the lesson isn't to fight every insult head-on. Perhaps it's to build something so unshakable that when the world finally looks your way, the only thing left to do is nod. Because in stories like this, where betrayal runs deep and dignity runs deeper, silence is never empty. It's loaded, precise, and when timed right, undeniable. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth, and no one who quietly builds their own foundation will ever be truly powerless again. They used to say I didn't need much. And maybe back then I believed them. I believed that staying quiet was the same as being mature, that not asking for help made me responsible, that being the strong one meant carrying everything in silence, because someone had to. But silence has a weight, and one day it breaks something. So when they handed me that folder, expecting gratitude for the privilege of being exploited, something in me shifted. Not in anger, not in revenge, in clarity. This was never about a loan. It was about how people rewrite your worth when they think you won't fight back. I didn't raise my voice. I raised documents. I didn't slam the door. I built one, with a lock they don't have the key to. And if you're still reading this, maybe you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe you've been called too independent. Maybe your success made them uncomfortable. Maybe they only come to you when they're running short. on money, on options, on someone else to blame. If so, I want you to know you are not cold for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not selfish for asking, "And what about me?" Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't forgive, it's redefine the terms. Thank you for listening to this story. And if no one has told you lately, you don't owe anyone your silence, your savings, or your soul just to keep the peace. You're allowed to walk away without explaining. You're allowed to build without applause. You're allowed to say, enough. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment, even just one word. Seen, same, strong, whatever fits. Because stories like this aren't just about what was taken. They're about what we reclaimed. And if you've ever been written off, underestimated, or erased, I hope you find the moment to say, I'm still here. And this time, I decide the ending. Thank you for being here. Truly. And if you're on a journey like mine, I'm rooting for you. Quietly, fiercely, completely. You don't need much, you just need the truth. And sometimes that's more powerful than anything they ever gave you.